John chapter 5. While I was preparing the lesson, I remembered something that kind of happened to me, or an experience that I had, and I think maybe it's a little bit of the lesson, some of the things that are going on in our world today. But I was reminded of a lesson that was taught to me while I was going through EMT training, or training to be a medic while in the United States Air Force. One day we came in, and our instructors were kind of hard on us, because not only is it EMT training, it's military EMT training. So there was not only the discipline that was involved in actually training to be an EMT. There was added on top of that the discipline expectations of the military in general. So one day we came in and sat in our classroom, having marched in the wee hours of dawn in the rain of Wichita Falls, Texas, to the place where we needed to be. Sat down, and our instructors came in. And we thought it unusual at first, but warmed up to the idea when they walked through the door and decided they were going to provide for us donuts for the day. Donuts? We don't get donuts, right? Your instructor doesn't bring you donuts, so we go up and we go have our donuts. And they even brought orange juice. Not only was it orange juice, it was individual cartons of orange juice. I didn't have, military, everything's community, right? You live in a barracks and there are other people, and you get used to, kind of sharing the space and sharing the things, and unfortunately, sharing the bathroom and, stuff like that, right? We get our own individual orange juice. So we eat our donuts, we get our orange juice, we go back, we sit in our chairs, and we wait. And we wait. And the instructors come back and they ask us, "Oh, was that good?" "Yeah, it was good. It was really, really good." So we took the boxes, threw them away, and the teacher says, "Well, first lesson of the day is this." And he walks to the back of the room and he flips the light off. Flips the light off, and only one of them really stays on, but it's one of those black lights. One of those black lights. And what we didn't realize was that the box of donuts and all of the juices were covered with this microscopic dust. Covered with this microscopic dust that you could not see with the naked eye. And yet, there it was. Every single one of us. And some of it was funny. Some people had it all over their face. Some people had it in their hair. Some people had it on their shoulders. Other people had it, and you're just sitting there like, how did you get it there? It was all over the place. All over the place. And their point was, disease is communicable. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. That's what it takes. If any one of you would have, gone and, washed your hands before eating, then you wouldn't have had it all over your face and, all over, who you are. Now, the lesson made me kind of think of that, because there are a lot of things that happen in life. There are a lot of times when we look at the Bible, and yet it's not really until we kind of put on our spiritual lenses. It's not really until we kind of flip off the light of the world and flip on that light of spirituality that we really see the true meaning of things. And I think John chapter 5 is one of those chapters where this is demonstrated for us in a very overt way, in a very dramatic kind of way. You remember this story well. There's a guy who is living in Jerusalem, or around Jerusalem, and there's a pool. This man is crippled in some way, shape, or form. We are told that Christ enters into Jerusalem. He's going there to celebrate a feast. We're not told what feast it is, and because that's really not the important part. We do understand that it is the Sabbath, and Christ enters into Jerusalem, and he does so by the sheep gate. Near this sheep gate was this pool, and the name of the pool, at least in Aramaic, is Bethesda. Bethesda. And there's a reason why we're told the name of the pool, because Bethesda in Aramaic means house of mercy, or house of grace. And if you know that one little fact about this chapter, if you define that one little word within that one little verse in this larger context of 40-some verses, then you've pretty much got the point of the entire chapter. You've pretty much got the point of the entire chapter. Bethesda means house of mercy, house of grace. So Christ comes up to this pool, and by tradition, it seems, that this pool was considered a place of healing. It was considered a place of cleansing. As a matter of fact, there was this story that was told about the place. Now, if you're reading the English Standard Version of the Bible, you'll notice that verse 4 is not there. Verse 4 is not there. In other versions of the Bible, they kind of, leave it out as well. But if you're reading the King James or the New King James, or some other version, you know that the story is that an angel of the Lord would come down and stir the waters of the pool of Bethesda. And the first person who would get into the water, once the waters were stirred, would receive some kind of healing. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us whether this was a legitimate thing. It just tells us that is, what the people, believed. And we don't know whether this was some kind of ongoing miracle. If it is, and if it is legitimate, it's certainly the only one like it throughout all of the history that we can find or describe as biblical history. So it would be kind of unique. But it's at least the story. It's kind of the backdrop. Well, regardless of whether it was true or not, the fact of the matter is that a lot of people thought it was true. And in verse 3, we're introduced to the fact that the multitude, or a multitude of people, not just a couple people, but a multitude of people apparently believed this. And when they had problems, when they had difficulties, maybe they were invalid, maybe they were lame, maybe they were paralyzed, they would come and they would lay by the pool waiting for the waters. Now, along comes Jesus Christ. Along comes Jesus Christ, and he is going to end up healing one of the individuals who is there. And that healing, which takes place on the Sabbath for at least two separate reasons, is going to cause a problem between Christ and the Jewish teachers of the day. The first one is going to be the fact that the guy gets up and begins to carry his bed, which they say was illegal on the Sabbath. You can't carry your bed around on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to be doing any kind of work. The second thing that kind of got him in trouble is that when Christ began to explain that he was, Lord of the Sabbath, it's going to cause some difficulty here. You're claiming that you're the Son of God, and that's really beginning about verse 19 until the end of the chapter. Christ begins to make these arguments and talk about witnesses and so on and so forth, how he is the equal of the Father in heaven. Now, that's kind of going to be our point, too, at the beginning. But we're going to kind of look at it in a little different light. You know the story. But I want us to kind of go back. And I want us to kind of take a little different tack when it comes to the story in and of itself. And I want to look at the story, basically breaking it down into three fundamental points and comparing it to mankind in general, but more specifically to Israel. The first thing that I want us to look at is the man himself, or not the man himself, the multitude of people. Christ comes up into the city of Jerusalem. He goes through the sheep gate. He sees the multitude of people. Now, how are the multitude of people described? It says here that they are blind, they are lame, they are paralyzed, they are invalids. These are the people that society basically can't do anything with. These folks aren't living in a day and age where we have what some people have called a safety net. Where they have these social and political programs that, kind of catch people when, they can't provide for themselves. There was no, medical subsidy for poor. There was no, none of that stuff. There was no government-funded insurance and so on and so forth. Okay? You were pretty much on your own. Pretty much on your own, especially if you didn't have family. If you had family and they were willing to take care of you, you could probably have some kind of life. But if you didn't, man, you really had a problem. You pretty much had to resort to begging. This is seen throughout all of Scripture. You remember the man by the name of Lazarus who begged outside the rich man's house. Well, that was probably his only recourse. But there's a larger picture here. Okay? This multitude of people, it's not just any multitude of people. You and I know very, very well that when Christ performed miracles, he usually did it for a reason. And the Bible focuses on certain topics because they are illustrations of certain ideas. Why tell us the story about this guy at the pool of Siloam? I mean, what's the point? What's the point? Just to demonstrate that Christ could heal people? No. I think there are several points. And I think the first point is very simply this: that the multitude that we would otherwise call humanity, that we would call mankind in general, is a group of people that demonstrate a spiritual brokenness. There's not a single one of us. There's not a single one of us that don't need some kind of spiritual healing. Take this physical picture and apply it into the spiritual realm, and we are the multitude. We are the multitude. There's not a single person who lives outside the need of Christ. That is, of age, of accountability, and of a mind to be able to do so. That's just simply, that's just simply fact of the matter. I mean, how many times does the Bible tell us things like, all men sin and fall short of the glory of God? It is one of those well-known facts among us that, mankind in general has a spiritual, brokenness about them. Look where they are. They're there and they're wretched in their sin. Blessed are what? How does the Sermon on the Mount begin? How do those Beatitudes begin? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who realize their, spiritual, poverty. But then I want you to notice something else about the multitude. Not only are they broken in some way, physically, in the world, in humanity in general, in that spiritual sense, but that they're sitting there and they're waiting. They're waiting. For what? Well, in this case, in the physical sense, they're waiting for the pool. They're waiting for the angel of the Lord, so to speak, to stir up the pool. Now, we live in a day and age, too, where people, are waiting. Now, there are periods of time when that is a very real thing. Before Christ came, people who legitimately were seeking him were waiting for that time to come. The Bible tells us that, prophets anticipated, the coming of Christ and spoke about it, not even knowing the things that they were revealing. The Bible tells us also that, angels long to look into those things that were part of that gospel plan of salvation. So there was that legitimate time of waiting, but there are people who are still waiting today. There are people who still live in their brokenness, and they're kind of waiting for the solution to come, to them. Another thing that I want you to notice, too, is that Christ comes to them. I would imagine that if it's like most periods of history, that this was probably a place that people avoided. Some people avoid it, right? There are places where we just simply don't go. Or there are folks that we see that, for some reason or other, we cross the other side of the street. Because, we don't want to have to deal with, them and what we would consider maybe their neediness or their, overbearingness, or the fact that, they keep on asking us for this and that and the other thing. Christ doesn't shy away from them. Christ just simply walks right up to them. They're sitting there, they're wretched, they're waiting, and Christ goes to them because he has a heart of compassion, for them. If you turn over in your Bibles, to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. Anybody remember what it says? I'll start it for you. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, right? Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. Now, Christ is not talking about some lunch date that he wants to have with you. He's talking about acceptance in a spiritual way. He's talking about accepting of him as the one who can heal those things that trouble us, because indeed he is equal with the Father, as the miracle itself is going to prove. So the first picture that we have here, the first picture that Christ confronts is a picture of a wretched, vile kind of people who are put off by society. Over here, kind of stuffed in the northeast corner of the city, near the gate, and Christ goes directly to it. He goes directly to it, and he's moved with compassion, and he ends up healing an individual. And that brings us to the second picture. First picture is the picture of mankind. The second picture is the picture of the man himself. And now, Christ could have picked any man, right? He could have picked any person there. But who's the guy that he picks? The guy that he picks. He picks a guy who's been sitting at the fountain for, do you remember how many years? 38 years. This guy has been going to this place, and because he hasn't had help to get down into the fountain, or because he simply is relying upon himself and can't quite crawl there fast enough, or however it is he moves himself, he's not able to get into the fountain. So 38 years, he's not healed. He's not healed. Now, you got to give it to the guy for stick-to-itiveness, right? I mean, going there and sitting, and I don't know what the timetable was for, the whole fountain experience thing or the pool experience thing. How is it? How often is it Old Faithful? Blows off every hour or something like that. The Bible doesn't tell us the frequency of the pool, and how often the waters were stirred. But this guy had apparently been coming there, for 38 years. 38 years, and it never seemed to happen. Christ goes up to him. He comes up to him, and he notices, first, the guy is disabled. Second of all, the guy is desperate. I mean, come on. 38 years, no one there to carry you. No one there to carry you. No one to take you to the water. Can't help but think that Christ chooses this guy deliberately. Deliberately. Because he is kind of the picture of God's chosen people, if you think about it. I mean, there are some physical similarities. Of course, he is one of God's chosen people. More than likely, he's a Jew. No doubt he feels comfortable there in, Jerusalem. All right, so he's probably a Jew. We're not told whether he's a Jew or not, but we kind of assume he is. He's there, in Jerusalem. But consider the fact that for 38 years he came. For 38 years he relied upon himself or someone else to carry him about. And for 38 years he was not healed. He still existed in his brokenness all of those years. Now let me ask you this. According to Deuteronomy, how many years did the children of Israel wander in the wilderness? 40? In the wilderness, 38. They wandered in the wilderness for 38 years. Now, it probably took them a year to get there. They got to remember, the wilderness is way down here. Where they need to go is way up here. So after 38 years, God comes and he gets them and basically takes them back to land. But guess what? You got to fight your way back now. You got to go conquer kings like Zion. Excuse me. Like Og and all of those kings on the eastern edge. But for 38 years, they were down here in this wilderness, completely removed from God, existing only in their broken state as God abandons them to that dry and dusty place until an entire generation of people dry up and die. Now here's this guy. He's at the pool. He's done it for 38 years. 38 years. Coincidence? Maybe. But I can't help but think that he's painting the picture of Israel. And further boast of the fact is Christ comes to him and he looks at the guy and he says, "Do you want to be healed?" Do you remember the guy's answer? I mean, if it were you, what would you say? "Sure, I want to be healed." "Yeah, I want to be healed." What's this guy's answer? He says, "Well, I've got no one to carry me to the pool." It's almost as if he's kind of making an excuse. Almost as if he's kind of saying, "Well, I would, but it depends on my effort, and obviously I'm not getting myself there, and it depends on the effort of maybe my own brethren, but obviously they're not going to take me there, so really what recourse do I have?" Christ is offering him a healing, and this guy just simply doesn't see it. Much like his own people. As a matter of fact, if you skip down just a little bit in the context to verse 39. Christ is having a conversation with the Jewish leaders, and he says, "You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. Christ says, do you want to be healed? And the guy says, well, yeah, but no one will put me in the pool. In other words, it almost sounds like he's kind of refusing here, but Christ looks at him and he says, arise, take up your bed, and walk. So we have the picture of mankind. We have the picture of his people, pictured as disabled and desperate and needing a path. And then along comes Christ and he provides that path. You know, you're sitting here and you're depending on this pool that is water. It's water. You're waiting for a healing that for all intents and purposes is never going to come. When I can do it for you, because you see, the same Father that delivered those children out of the wilderness, across that river Jordan and into that promised rest, is here with you today in the form of his Son, who can provide you a healing beyond anything this pool could do. So we have the picture of humanity, but then we have this picture of the man himself. I'll say one more thing about the man. I think we would be remiss if we didn't say it. And that is that, you know, there's a tendency for all of us to kind of want to depend upon the tangible things. You know, this guy had to be carried about. He had to be placed in the pool. And at the end of the day, you know, it was some mystical, magical type of pool that was supposed to heal him, but, you know, he had to get there first. He kind of wanted to rely on it. Well, I have no one to put me in the pool. I mean, how many people kind of do that even today? You know, we have Christ. He went to a cross. He died. He shed his blood so that you can have your sins washed away. As you listen to his word and you have that faith that, you know, convicts your heart and causes you to want to do something about your brokenness. And make that confession, yeah, I want to live that same life. I want to walk the path that Christ showed to mankind, showed to Israel, even though they would reject it for the most part. You know, how many people hear that life-saving message today, and yet they still want to kind of depend or put their faith on things outside of Christ? You know, we want to put our faith in our own works. Well, we're just going to work our way there. We're going to earn our own way. You know, this is the house of mercy. This is the house of grace. This is the house that God built. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8 tells us that, you know, you're saved by grace through the faith. Okay? Not of works, lest any man should boast. If there's any saving to be done, God is going to be the one who's going to do it. Now, because you are saved, because you have God's salvation, there is an obligation to live a certain way. And it's that path that Christ elucidates in this ministry. But the last thing I want us to look at is the Messiah. We have mankind, we have the man, and then we have the Messiah. The Messiah, verses 8 and 9 of the context. And I apologize, I'm skipping over a whole bunch of stuff because my voice is just about done. Okay, verses 8 and 9 say, Jesus said to him, get up, take up your bed, and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. Over and over, we're told in the Bible that Christ had this compassionate heart. He had this just wonderful ability to be moved when he saw the plight of humanity. When he saw his own people. I mean, go over to, just very quickly, Matthew chapter 22. In Matthew chapter 22. And I want you to read with me verse, let's see, I think it's 37. No. I'm trying to find it. I don't know. Anyhow, there's a point in Christ's ministry. There's a point in Christ's ministry, several points as a matter of fact, where he is going to, peer out over Jerusalem as a city, And one of those times, he's moved with compassion. In his heart, he just feels this just deep disappointment. And he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you like a mother hen gathers her chicks, but you would not." And you read the words, and you can just kind of sense the heaviness. You can sense the dismay in his words, because he wanted people to come. He wanted people he wanted people to embrace the salvation, especially his own people, who he knew had wandered in that wilderness, who had that history of continually seeming to want to move away from God, but they wouldn't. Another occasion, he's with his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, and he looks out on the people and he says that his heart was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep with no shepherd. Of course, that directly precedes the feeding of the thousands. Christ had this compassion, and his compassion moved him to act and to do things and to serve humanity. That's what Paul is talking about, really, when he talks about, having that mind of Christ. We kind of sum it up in the word service, but in reality, service is usually preceded by movement, an internal movement that says, I've got to do something, a compulsion that says, I can't stand by and watch this happen without doing something about it. That's the kind of thing that drove Christ. He walked in, he saw these people suffering by the pool, he goes over to them, and there's healing. There's healing, but it's not just a physical healing. It's a spiritual one as well. See, the hidden message in all of this is revealed in the final verses of the chapter, where he talks about the fact that he is the equal of God on earth, and that he comes here to bring salvation. It goes through all of the different arguments for that, and he talks a lot about the testimony of many, many witnesses. But the whole point of that context is he has the authority and the power to do these things. When I tell you I offer the healing, when I tell you I offer the salvation, when I tell you that I am the Messiah, I'm telling you that based upon the authority I have as coming from the Father. He's moved with compassion. He's moved with compassion to act. And then what does he offer? Well, he offers this guy new life. And it's instantaneous, right? That's one of the things that mark the miracles of Christ, as opposed to what some claim are miracles perhaps in our day and age. Maybe strange happenings, things we don't necessarily understand, kind of happen today that, we have no explanation for. Well, that's not the same as the miracle that Christ did. Christ said, "Arise and walk." And the guy walked. Though for 38 years he couldn't even move himself around. So immediately this guy's life changes. He goes from broken to whole. He goes from that, old man who couldn't walk to this new man. That kind of sounds like spiritual condition, doesn't it? Paul, put off the old man, put on the new. Take off the old dirty clothes and, put on the new garments of faith. Kind of sounds like Paul in Romans 12. Be not conformed, right? To the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, that transformation process here is instantaneous. It's instantaneous with this fellow, so he offers him this new beginning. And it's a beginning that is free from all of that brokenness, free from the shame of having to go and to sit by the fountain with all of the other broken people. Free of that entire life. It's the same offer that he makes today for people who are spiritually broken. Unfortunately, not a lot of people want to rise and walk. That's part of it, right? Do you want to be healed? Rise, take up your bed, and walk. Now, was it wrong for the guy to carry his bed around on the Sabbath? I guess kind of depending on who you talk to, right? If you understand the fact that God desires mercy rather than sacrifice, then it's perfectly fine. But if you're the leading Pharisaical Jews of the day and age, it was definitely against the law. That's always the thing that stands out. And I know we've not even touched on it because we're kind of looking at the story a different way. That's always the thing that kind of stood out in this story to me. Here, this great miracle is done for this guy who's come there 38 years. They know who he is. They have to know who he is. 38 years this guy has come and sat by the fountain. 38 years he's not had this happen for him. And it finally does. And the only thing they notice is that he's carrying around his carpet. That's all they notice. You talk about blindness. That same blindness, as we said, exists in the world today. Christ says, come, take up your bed and walk. Come, have relief from that spiritual brokenness that you're living in. Come, and by me you can overcome that heartache and that addiction and that whatever it is that troubles you, that causes disharmony in your life, that causes you to be ununified between mind, body, and soul. Come, and all of that can be healed. And we say, no. So we have the multitude of the broken. We have the man that demonstrates the path that especially the Jews should take. And then we have the Messiah who brings all healing by his power, by his control. And we can have that same healing today if we'll but come. So that's the invitation tonight. If we have not come to him, why do we wait? And why stand at that empty fountain that's not going to do anything for us? Or why stand at the empty promises that the world has for us? And they're never going to be able to take away that which only Christ can remove. If you're subject to the invitation's call this evening, we urge you to come as together we stand and sing.